I have been where you are seated now many times. I taught at a two-year college. Well, I taught a couple of different two-year colleges. I taught Jeff State, Birmingham, and Gadsden State, which is a fairly large. Well, Jeff State is too. They're both big. He just told me that y'all have a huge two-year school system here. So that's my old stomping ground. I'm glad to be here with you. I don't know if you were required to come and you had to check off your name at the door or whatever, but I appreciate each of you taking the time to come, and I'll talk with you just a little bit about writing, mostly my journey with writing. But then I want to hear some of your questions. I don't know if does everyone teach writing? Most of you. No. Okay, so this is not one of those kind of sessions. All right, well, we'll just talk politics or something. No, we won't. Believe me. I start out a lot of these talks that I do. This is going to be terribly informal. I do have more formal kinds of things I'll be doing when Pat and I are talking together. Believe me, when I speak with Pat, most of the time I will not do it because he blows anybody out of the water. He's one of the best and most entertaining speakers I've ever heard. But I do, try to prepare and have my little cheat sheet and, all this kind of stuff. But today I thought I'd just talk with you. But I do start out sometimes by talking about teaching, and during the time that I taught freshmen and sophomores mostly. I never finished my PhD. I started at UAB, but so they wouldn't let me teach the upper, the upper grades, which I understand. But I think like so many of us do, I have a friend that teaches up in Pennsylvania, and she's always sending me the little things that her students say on their papers, And so I had a collection, and I used to start out the second semester of my freshman having them do a book review. So that's where most of the little gems came from, and so I had one that said, "This book was so good, was written so well, that I think the writer must have written it before he died." I never quite figured that one out. But my favorite one that's priceless, I swear to God, I love this one. And the book that he was reviewing was The Kindness of Strangers, about Tennessee Williams. And he said Tennessee Williams would have been a great writer had it not been for his excessive use of language. So I decided that that's my problem, Such excessive use of language. If I can ever stop that, I have it made. I think my journey as a writer began as soon as I learned to hold a pen and write. I started writing stories when I first started writing. That's why I was so glad to learn how to write, so I can finally write all these stories that even at a very young age was going through my head. I've always been interested in story, and I think writing is primarily story. That's such an important part of any book, because no matter how great the writing itself, how beautifully written it might be. If you don't have the story, it's not you're not going to have as compelling a book. And on the other hand, sometimes you can have a great storyline that's poorly written. I'm not going to mention, the Da Vinci Code or anything like that, but I think we can all find examples of the story can be intriguing whether or not the writing is. So it was story, but I was, of course, at a very young age interested in the stuff. I guess kids at that time were mostly ghost stories and that sort of stuff. So I guess I started out my career writing ghost stories, and I found out something about writing with that, though, because what I would do is I would write these little stories and I would read them to my friends at recess, but I charged them. But sometimes, they could trade, their popsicle for my, ice cream sandwich or something like that. This was back in the days when you still had recess. I don't know that they even have that, anymore at schools. But I found out that if you end a chapter so that they won't hear the next chapter. So I was writing page turners at a very early age, I guess. But what I didn't know or appreciate was where you get your material. Now, I was raised in a haunted house, so writing ghost stories was not a problem for me. But as I got older, then I started, for my girlfriends were the ones I would write my little stories for, and then I would start doing romances, and stuff like that we were interested in at that age. And so then I would start, to make up stuff, and of course it would have to be castles and knights or counts and all that kind of stuff. Come on in. So I think I got off on the wrong foot by thinking that there was nothing in my life that I would ever be able to write about, based on my personal experiences, that I would have to pull things from my imagination, in order to write. Because I was raised in a very small town. I was raised on a farm. Now, I know y'all are surprised to hear this. You think, surely I'm so sophisticated that I must have been raised in, Manhattan, but in South Alabama, too. So, and a peanut farm. So, all I wanted to do was to get out of there. That's all I wanted in my life, is just to get off the farm, to get to, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to, smoke cigarettes and be Dorothy Parker, of my generation, Zelda Fitzgerald. I just had, but I couldn't, this could not happen in L.A., lower Alabama. So as a consequence, I almost missed seeing, well, I did for a long time, miss seeing, I think, the most important thing that a writer has at some point to come to terms with is that stories are all around us. Stories are where we find them. We don't have to go off. I had everything right there in this small town. All the drama that and all the stories that I could ever, the characters, the local color. But I didn't appreciate that. And maybe none of us really do when we're young. Maybe we have to leave and go back and look back. But it took me quite a while. I also didn't really think that I would ever write a novel. I had started out writing stories. I was very much intrigued with plays. I was very interested in maybe being a playwright. And I used to read, when I mentioned Tennessee Williams, he was one of my idols, I would read plays, just like they were, novels or something. I could read a play and picture it in my mind and so forth. So when I went to college, I got a double major in English and theater because I thought that's what I would eventually be doing. But I think, too, sometimes I did this because of living out in the sticks, that we got our books, most of our books from the library. Mother would take us in town, and we'd get our books from the library. And to make them last long, I was one of these kids that read all the time. I would get the biggest books, that I could find. So I think I also had it in my mind that if you were either a short story writer and you were concise and so forth, or you sort of specialized in dialogue as a playwright, but as far as writing a great big novel, that didn't seem to be something that I could even imagine myself doing. So I did focus on short stories and plays, and even tried my hand at poetry. I am not a poet, I say with great regret, because I love poetry and read poetry every night before I go to bed. That's my little devotional, I guess, and would love to be able to say that I have the gift, but I think you either do or don't, especially with poetry. But so I didn't think in terms of writing a novel for many years. My first novel, it was actually released in '95. I sold it in about actually 90, I think, because I had written it as my master's thesis, and it was a collection of short stories, Making Waves. I called it Making Waves in Zion, and I got my master's in '88, so I know I sold it a couple of years later. But what I did for my thesis is they were interrelated stories, and my thesis director suggested that I make a novel out of it. So that's how I came to write my first novel. It was almost, accidentally and just an experiment. And it's 256, I think, pages, 254, something like that. So it's almost a novella, really, really short. But it had nothing in it that was personal, based on any of my experiences. We had, I was, in my previous life, I was married to a preacher, and we were sent to different little towns, and we were at, he was serving a church in West Alabama, and we were in a little town where an accident had happened between their football star and his good friend. These two young men, his good friend was blamed for the accident and left town and was just sort of the black sheep of town and so forth. And so I took that and wrote this story, these two young men and their accident, and wrote this from different points of view from different people in the town. And that's Making Waves is the name of the beauty shop, because where we were in town, the parsonage was right across from the beauty shop. And by the way, I did have a review on that book one time that said all southern landscapes must have a steeple, and that I had undertaken with this book the three main institutes of the South: football, beauty shops, and religion. Yeah, the church. So that was all, in Making Waves. After Making Waves came out, finally, I had sold it to a small press because my thesis committee had suggested, well, you should try to, get this published. And I said, okay, how do you do that? Because I had had some things published then, but just in, the little journals and quarterlies, little literary magazines that we used to get in the English department, this kind of stuff. So I just sent it to a small press. I was thinking it's a small book, small press, that works for me. And my publisher there did want to know what else I was working on. And I started another book on about a rodeo rider, a female rodeo rider. I used to go to rodeos when I was young. Went with my grandparents lived near a place that had rodeos every summer, and so, I thought that would be fun to be a rodeo rider and so forth, and was writing a book about this. But while this was going on, I was living a life that I would later write about. I had always been in small town, raised in small town. The church was very central to my family's life, and we were there every time the church doors opened. So I was I was not in my family raised and encouraged to be a writer by any means. My mother and all my grandmother and my aunts and everybody took it upon themselves to raise me to be the perfect little Southern belle lady, always a lady, and so I was always torn. I always had these two parts of my character: the part of me that wanted to be a writer, that couldn't wait to get off the farm and to New York City and live a bohemian life, and the other part of me that wanted to please my mother and my aunts and so forth. And when I went off to college, it was kind of my first time away from home, and here I was, it's theater, major. Got in with the theater crowd, and here I was finally getting to smoke my cigarettes because my mama wasn't around, and being cool and bohemian and all this kind of stuff. And my mother was very disappointed in me, and she said she didn't understand me anymore. She didn't know me anymore. And so this must have, I think, looking back now, it's kind of hard to tell exactly how these things come about, and I'm a big believer in fate as well, but I wondered a lot if I was trying to please my mother when I married a theology student. And we lived in Atlanta, went to Emory. So I found myself going back to putting aside this part of me who wanted to be a writer, who wanted to express my creativity and so forth, and getting into a role I was more comfortable in because it was what I had been raised to do. It's what I've been molded to do. So I was I stayed a Sunday wife for 2 decades, and about the first decade and a half at least, I was very good at it. I was one of the darlings of the church set, because I did everything I was supposed to do. And I even used my writing interest to write church, pageants and plays and programs and devotionals. And the first I actually had sold a poem, which is really ironic. The first thing I ever sold was a poem, a religious poem in a religious publication. And the irony of it is it was called Eve, My Mother. And I ended up by saying Eve I would have eaten that apple too, which was such a lie. I would not have. I didn't, you know. So, uh, so all the time, though, that I was living a life as a Sunday wife and trying to do what was expected of me, I was most of all trying to please. I was trying to please my husband. I was trying to please my mother and, you know, my aunts and my grandmother, all the women who had formed me. I was trying to please the church and the community that we were in, and so forth. I began to lose myself as I was doing this, and the marriage became more and more unhappy as a result, as I grew, you know, unhappier with the loss of my own identity, and it was, you know, only because I was trying to be somebody who I wasn't. And I was also losing the spiritual part of me that had always been such an important part of my life, because it was all, even my writing reflected, it was all conventional, all done to, you know, to please others. I went to a trusted senior minister that we had at one of our churches that I really liked and respected, and to talk with him and tell him that I felt like I was, you know, losing myself, losing my identity. I couldn't do this anymore. And he said, "Oh, honey, you know, you just everybody just thinks the world of you, and you just doing such a good little job. Now you go back, and you get back to your writing, because that's obviously what, you know, you do well and that's what you need to be doing." Well, I took his advice. I did go back and go back to my writing, but I was writing in secret, and I began the journaling that would later become the book, The Sunday Wife. So I don't think it's a great coincidence that my marriage ended about the time my first book was released. So I then had the good fortune to meet and marry another writer who was more understanding of this need. I had to express myself. But I did not, when I wrote, even after The Sunday Wife, when I began to look at turning this into a fictional, it had been mostly journaling, and a lot of things that I have in here with the church ladies and so forth, the parsonage committee, actually happened. I experienced, you know, these. Then I thought, I can't do it. I don't want to send this book off. I'm going to pull that rodeo book out again, because, you know, I don't want anybody to know that I was a failure as a Sunday wife. You know, I'm nervous about what people will think about. What will the church ladies think? Will they recognize themselves in this? And while I get kicked out of the church, I'd already left the Methodist church by then, but I had become Episcopalian, but I was afraid they'd kick me out. And then I realized what I was doing. Here I was doing the same thing again, worrying about pleasing, you know, people, worrying about, and you cannot do that as a writer. That, I think, is the most important thing about writing that I learned, is that as a writer, you've got to be true to your story, whatever your story might be. And if you can't do that, then you don't have any business being a writer. If you don't have the courage, you know, and it does take courage. And I was very nervous when the book came out, and I was upset when I heard that a group of preachers' wives were trying to get the book banned. Of course, a bookseller, where I was going, he said, "Oh, hope they do, honey. That'll be the best thing for sales that could happen," But because it was, and then I've gotten a lot of letters, from folks saying, why did you pick on the Methodist Church? And I've gotten some that this really does tickle me. You obviously know nothing about it. Know how we work and so forth. Well, I beg to differ on that. I did do some fictionalizing, but I did write what I know, believe me. But I think my moment came when I spoke at the South Carolina Book Festival after the book came out. And then I was signing books afterwards, and they had put me at the noon hour to speak. And when I signed a book for a woman, she leaned over to tell me, "My husband is the Baptist preacher at First Methodist, and I sneaked out of the service to come over here and hear you speak." So, okay, I guess I finally spoken to someone in a way that I wanted. I thought that there might be other people like me who had found themselves in different roles, that we don't have our own identity sometimes. We're just, the teacher or the husband or the wife or whatever the role that we're playing, and not being true, to ourselves and to our own identity and so forth. So that is the story of the Sunday Wife, and how the book almost wasn't, and but I've been very glad, because I think had I not written this book, I would have not been able to go ahead and write The Same Sweet Girls, for example, which is about a group of women that I belong to, and I had said for years, one of these days, and I was thinking I would do that as short stories. I'm going to write some of our stories, and I never would have, I don't think I ever would have been able to do it. But that's what I wanted to share with you today, and then I would love to hear some of your questions. Let's see if I should have. Well, I'll have a brief reading from the book. I have, in order to do that, I have to set it up just a little bit. I used to hate to do readings. I've gotten a little better about it, but I'd start reading and I think, oh, wait a minute, I forgot to tell you so and so. You have to know this about the setting or whatever. It doesn't make sense. But my main character in here is a woman, much like myself that I was at the time, who finds herself in a playing a role, trying to please everybody. And so she has become very conventional in her approach. Now, I had her even more rebellious than I was. I had her from a different background than I had, more questioning, maybe in what I would have wanted to do. But her name is Dean Lynch, and she has a catalyst that helps her question how she got to be so away from the person that she was cut out to be. And she meets a woman in the church that they moved to a new church, she and this woman. And this woman is a friend that becomes the one that makes her question all this stuff, who begins to say, oh, why do you have to go to that, Lady United Methodist Women meeting or something like that? Go, sneak out with me and we'll go do so-and-so. And one of the things they do is they befriend a fortune teller who has moved into town. And this was actually based on a real thing. My aunt got on a kick. I have this real religious aunt that was trying to run this fortune teller out of their town. What on earth, is wrong with fortune teller? And but this Satan's work, So that's what this is. Madame Celeste is the fortune teller that they're working on. Well, so Augusta and Dean, the preacher's wife, crash a meeting, and this sort of happened to me. And do any of you know, I don't even know if they're still around, a group called Eagle Forum? Do you remember the Eagle Forum? It's a very right-wing group that came out against the ERA and things like this during this time. Well, I found myself, I went to a meeting with a friend one time and didn't realize that it was an Eagle Forum meeting until got right in the middle of it. So this is sort of, based a little bit on that. So I'll just read just a short part of that. Okay, Annie Laurie Glasscock is the woman who is conducting the meeting. And they come in, they interrupt the meeting. Annie Laurie says, you're welcome to join us, but, we don't usually we welcome visitors, but we don't usually let people come in unless they're, think along the same lines that we do. And they say, oh, well, we'll just join you and we'll just have our salad here. So evidently Annie Laurie Glasscock decided the only thing to do was ignore the intrusion and proceed with business. For she turned and whispered something to the women on either side of her before returning to the podium. Ladies, as usual, I'll ask you to eat your salads as we proceed, she said, picking up the glasses hanging on a chain around her neck and perching them on her nose. Probably in her 50s, she was an attractive woman, big-boned and blonde, expensively dressed in a white knit suit with gold buttons. The thick gold chain around her neck probably cost more than I made for my piano students all year. From it hung a jeweled cross the size of a hammer. One thing about the Christian right, they didn't bother themselves with Jesus' teachings about poverty and humility. Vanna Faye Bell has our devotional, Annie Laurie announced, and has consented to sing. Augusta winked at me as Vanna Faye Bell, the pride of Crystal Springs, came forward. She was beautiful with lustrous golden brown hair and a white-toothed smile. I'd never seen her without the smile, actually. In choir every Sunday, she maintained it throughout the sermon. She never took her eyes off Ben, her crush on him obvious. Vanna Faye placed a small tape recorder on the podium. Y'all forgive me for bringing tape music, she said in a low, breathy voice. I just spotted my dear preacher's wife, and if I'd known she'd be here, she could have played the piano for me. Several heads turned my way, and I picked up my fork nonchalantly, hoping Vanna Faye'd get on with her song and leave me alone. Any of y'all who haven't been to First Methodist since Brother Lynch came, she continued breathlessly, should pay us a visit. Every single Sunday, Brother Lynch inspires me. Ooh, I bet he does, Augusta murmured, and Celeste snickered. Let me put in a plug for his book of devotionals, Love Yourself Like Jesus Loves You. Vanna Faye nodded toward a woman in the audience. Y'all still have plenty of copies, Maylene? I recognized the woman, Maylene Herring, who ran Words of Life, the Christian bookstore downtown. She was always calling Ben, asking him to come sign copies for her customers. I cringed hearing her sugary sweet voice because she made no effort to hide her dislike of me, stemming from the time she ordered me to go find Ben at the church. I was teaching a piano lesson and had no intention of doing any such thing. One of these days I'll tell her what happened during Ben's first book signing. Maylene's husband, a leading citizen in Deacon First Baptist, caught me in the hallway and tried to fill me up. Vanna Faye continued, before I sing for y'all, I want to share with y'all what's in my heart. That sums up why Yankees hate the word y'all, Augusta whispered to Celeste. I find great comfort in reading my Bible, Vanna Faye began, but ladies, we deal with issues in our modern age that weren't around in biblical times, things like television and video games and the internet. I like Brother Ben's book because he deals with the real issues of today, like a chapter on the joys of a Christian home. And you ladies will appreciate this, a special section on keeping the romance in your marriage. To my horror, she wagged a finger in my direction. Maybe I should bring the expert up here to tell us about that chapter. There were polite chuckles while Augusta bruised my leg, kicking me. Yes, I read Brother Ben's book every night, Vanna Faye told her audience. I keep it right beside my bed. Bet she wishes it were Ben instead, Augusta snorted, and Celeste laughed out loud. I plunged my fork in the mound of chicken salad, red-faced. Vanna Faye turned on the tape recorder, then looked upward as though God were in the heavens above her, holding up a placard with the lyrics written on it. A dreamy look came over her face as she closed her eyes and swayed to the music, then started singing, Wind Beneath My Wings. With the final words, she leaned back, held her hand high, and shook it as though flinging fairy dust to her audience. Oh, this is their book. I have to remember to give it back to them. So, how about some questions? Yes.
First of all, I just want to thank you for coming
Thank you.
on this committee for this GPC Reads.
Uh-huh.
Encourage the students to read a book, and we're just really excited, and we're hoping that Pat gets a lot of good questions tomorrow. So.
Well, me too.
We have whole sections in the book for our English classes.
Great.
So
Yeah.
we're hoping for a good turnout, so thank you again.
You're right.
The question I have is that one of my favorite authors, and I'm probably mispronouncing his name, is Ian McEwan. Or
Uh-huh.
I'm not exactly sure. But
I think it's McEwan.
when hearing you talk about writing, you reminded me of the character Brioni Tallis in Atonement.
Whoa.
And I wanted to know if you had read the book, or
Yes.
seen the movie, and your thoughts about that. And
Yeah.
also, maybe just telling us about some books that you've been rereading, and the memories of compared to now versus when you were younger when you read them.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. Interesting question. Okay, yeah, I read Atonement when it came out. I'm not sure, that I could really come. I have to look at that character again to
She's
see.
she's obsessed with writing plays.
Yes, yeah,
And
yeah.
You were talking about how you wrote plays when
Right,
you were younger.
right,
And
yeah.
I just thought, very literary character.
He probably based her on me. I bet that was it. But yeah, I thought it was a wonderful book. And I always get excited with kids want to write, read. That was the main thing when I taught creative writing, that I told my students they shouldn't even be sitting in there unless they were avid readers, because I think that's where the seed is planted. And yeah, I read when I was, as I said, I read these huge books, and then I got on a real kick of anything British, such an Anglophile. And so I read Jane Austen, back before I ever went to college or anything, and knew that this was something that I should be reading or something. And I was the only one that loved the books we used to have to read, like Mill on the Floss and those, if y'all remember, Silas Marner, David Copperfield, these things that we were required to read in 9th and 10th and, junior and senior. And I loved them, and my classmates, I always hated them. But you know what's interesting about your questions, because I think now that I go back and I read them for enjoyment. I read them because they took me to England, where I just wanted to go anywhere outside of Alabama, I mean, I went to Atlanta one time when I was a little girl, and then when I was 16, I was a youth delegate to Lake Junaluska. It's the first time I had been north of Atlanta. So, I think that's one reason I was so taken with these books, because it was another country, it was another society and so forth, and it transported me there. So I read them for enjoyment at the time, and I didn't know that I was reading necessarily, classics or great books or anything like that. But I did, and I didn't read romance novel. Not that there's anything wrong with reading, any kind of book or reading a book for enjoyment or whatever, but I didn't. I like those kinds of books. So I think now I would look at them more, as read them again. I recently reread Sense and Sensibility because it had been a while, and look at it more for structure and dialogue, and the creation of a place and this sort of stuff than I did when I first read them. Anyone else? Question or comment? That's fine.
Hi. Do you have any problems dealing with the real material from your life, converting it to fiction? I mean,
Yeah.
I grew up in a small town.
Mm-hmm.
I have that sometimes. You think about, well, if their folks ever read this, what would they say? I mean, how do you get over that?
I think it's very difficult, and I think my father's still alive. He's 95, and I want to write what I call my farm book, going back to the earth kind of, the land kind of book and so forth. And I've kind of dragged my feet about that, and I have even wondered, will I be able to write this book with my father as a character in it, as long as he's, here? I don't know. So, and like with The Sunday Wife, I made Dean Lynch, my character who was based on me, I made her from an entirely different background from mine and stuff like that to fictionalize. So, and with the Same Sweet Girls, I did a lot of fictionalizing of our stories. So the person to ask that question to is Pat, because I have told him before that one of these days he might want to consider writing fiction. It's yet to happen, but he just starts telling me when we were walking on the beach or something, and he said, I was here when we first saw the white porpoise. And I said, oh, really? That was real? And then another time we went to Columbia. Now, this was a service station where they had Happy the Tiger that I used in The Prince of Tides and all this. And, everything, he, takes everything and turns it into fiction, but he doesn't do much turning. And so I haven't gotten to the point that I'm comfortable enough, that I just can do it pretty literally. And it's very difficult, I think. Absolutely. I know where a story's starting and where I'm going with it, but I'm not, I'm not going. I don't outline it. It comes to me as I write it, and it is. It's sort of revealed. Oh, okay. I'll take one more question.
Do you have any, just piggybacking off of that question about writing, there's a story everywhere. Do you have to deal with, as a writer, do writers have to deal with libel issues if people read your book and say, well, I understand she fictionalized it. However, I see myself in there, especially if it's a pretty personal story to tell, but it's relevant to the story. Do you?
Yeah, the questions about libel issues, I didn't know, about that much about that at all. And I have heard since then, because Pat and I have talked, because he's done so much of that. I think I disguised mine enough that hadn't been worried about libel, but yeah, you can be sued, and it's happened. And a friend of mine actually, Jack, you know Connie Mae Fowler, has written a book that has her ex-husband. She does a number on him, but she had to change a lot of it to the publisher would not, bring it out because they consider it libelous. So I think you do have to be careful about that. You can be sued.
Did you ever write the book about the rodeo?
No. But you know what happened just recently? A woman sent me a book for a blurb, to give her a blurb for it. I started reading it. It's about a female rodeo rider. So now I don't have to. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming.